Happy New Year, everyone. Today is the first day of a brand new year, January 1st, 2021. And the book I picked out for tonight is called Happiness is a Warm Blanket, Charlie Brown. Do you guys sleep with a teddy bear or a special blanket? Well, this is about Linus and his special blanket. It says, Linus loved his blanket. It made him feel safe and secure. It soaked up all of his fears and frustrations. Linus didn't like to be away from his blanket ever, not even when his sister Lucy decided it was time to clean it. Wash day, Lucy would shout. It's in the rinse cycle, she'd say, as Linus began to sweat. And finally, it's in the spin cycle. At last, Linus would get his blanket back. But lately, Linus's friends had begun teasing him about his blanket. They thought it was silly and got in the way. You and that silly blanket, Schroeder called. I can't stand it, said Charlie Brown. Even Sally, who loved everything about Linus, had something to say about his blanket. You're my sweet baboo, she told Linus, but I could like you even more if you'd give up that blanket. Only Charlie Brown's dog Snoopy understood how great Linus's blanket really was, and he wanted it for himself. Uh-oh. Linus had an even bigger problem than teasing or a jealous dog. His grandmother was coming to visit. Grandma didn't like Linus's blanket one bit. Lucy began to pester Linus more than ever. If you don't give up that silly blanket, she said, Grandma's going to cut it into 1,000 pieces. Linus had to find a way to give up his blanket before Grandma came. But how? Linus tried a substitute, but that had its drawbacks. He's trying to use the dish towel while she's drying dishes. Lucy locked the blanket in a closet, but Linus couldn't stay away. You better give it back, Charlie Brown told Lucy. What makes you say that, Charlie Brown? Lucy asked. Grandma's visit was just a few days away, and nothing seemed to work. Linus was not going to give up his blanket, but someone else had other plans. Snoopy! Linus screamed. Linus chased Snoopy everywhere, but Snoopy made a daring escape. Seeing Linus's blanket fly through the air gave Lucy an idea. He's using it like a parachute, isn't he? Yeah. Lucy made a kite out of Linus's blanket to keep it away from him, but Linus wasn't fooled. My blanket! Linus yelled. Things only got worse for Linus when Lucy let go of the kite. Linus watched his beloved blanket float off into the air. Oh dear, poor Linus. Linus's blanket was really gone this time. Staring up at the great big sky, he felt sadder than he ever had. I bet I'll never see my blanket again, he said. Still, Linus had to try to get his blanket back. He asked Charlie Brown to help him put an ad in the paper. Lost. One light blue blanket in the shape of a kite. Please return. Owner desperate. Even though his good friend Charlie Brown stayed by his side, Linus could barely sleep without his blanket. He kept thinking about it, wondering where it could be. Soon, Linus got some good news. It was a telegram from the Air Rescue Service. They found my blanket, he told Charlie Brown. They are mailing it back to me. Linus was thrilled to get his blanket back, but his happiness did not last long. Grandma was arriving that day, and Lucy had come up with a surefire way of curing Linus of his blanket habit once and for all. I buried it, she said. Linus dug and dug and dug, but he could not find his blanket. Just when things seemed hopeless, Linus's blanket seemed to find him.
Like the puppy found it.
It was time for Linus to face Grandma. She was not happy that Linus still had his blanket, but Linus stood his ground. I need this blanket, he told Grandma. It's the only real security I have. After all, everyone had someone or something that helped them get through the day. It wasn't just Linus with his blanket. Sally had her sweet baboo Linus. Schroeder had his piano. Lucy had Schroeder. And Snoopy had his dinner bowl. And even Grandma had her coffee. So everyone had something. Linus made a good argument for keeping his blanket, but Grandma would not listen. Hand it over, Linus asked. You want me to hand it over? Sure enough, Grandma took Linus's blanket away. But Grandma didn't really get Linus's blanket. He had swapped it with a dish towel and tricked her. After Grandma had gone, Linus got out his real blanket. Charlie Brown was happy for Linus. Everything was back to normal, and Linus's blanket was safe. Still, Linus was a little sad to see Grandma go. I'm going to miss the thrill of the chase, he told Charlie Brown. Luckily for Linus, someone would always want his blanket. And this story I chose was one of my older kids' favorite books. This is a fun one. It's called Froggy Gets Dressed. It was cold. Froggy woke up and looked out the window. Snow, snow, he sang. I want to play in the snow. Go back to sleep, Froggy, said his mother. Don't you know, frogs are supposed to sleep all winter. Wake up when the snow melts. No, no, cried Froggy. I'm awake, awake. I want to go out and play in the snow. Have you ever seen a frog play in the snow?
No.
No, me neither. So Froggy put on his socks, zoop, pulled on his boots, zup, put on his hat, zat, tied on his scarf, zwit, tugged on his mittens, zum, and flopped outside into the snow, flop, flop, flop. Look at all the other animals enjoying the snow. It says, Froggy, called his mother. What? Yelled Froggy. Did you forget to put something on? Froggy looked down. Oops, cried Froggy. I forgot to put on my pants. He went outside with no pants. He flopped back inside. Flop, flop, flop. Tugged off his mittens, untied his scarf, took off his hat, pulled off his boots, but he left his socks on, and slipped his pants on. Zip! Then he pulled on his boots, zup, put on his hat, zat, tied on his scarf, zwit, tugged on his mitten, zum, and flopped back outside into the snow. Flop, flop, flop. Froggy, called his mother. What? Yelled Froggy. Did you forget to put something on? Froggy looked down. Oops, he cried. I forgot to put on my shirt. And your coat, added his mother. So he flopped back inside. Flop, flop, flop. Tugged off his mittens, untied his scarf, took off his hat. He left his pants on, boots and socks on, and buttoned up his shirt. Zut, zut, zut. Then he snapped on his coat, snap, put on his hat, zat, tied on his scarf, zwit, tugged on his mittens, zum, and flopped back outside into the snow. Flop, flop, flop. Froggy, called his mother. What? Yelled Froggy. Did you forget to put something on? Froggy looked down. He had on his mittens. He had on his scarf. He had on his coat. He had on his shirt. He had on his pants. He had on his boots. He had on his socks. He reached up. Yep, he had on his hat. What could he be missing? Your underwear, his mother laughed. Oops, cried Froggy, looking more red in the face than green. Oh my goodness. So he flopped back inside, flop, 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 tugged off his mittens, untied his scarf. Are you embarrassed for him? Unsnapped his coat, unbuttoned his shirt, unzipped his pants, pulled off his boots, took off his socks, he left his hat on, and slipped his long johns on with a zap of elastic. Then he put on one sock, zoop, pulled on one boot, zup, tugged on one mitten, zum, started to tug on the other, and let it drop, and said, I'm too tired. And he went back to sleep. Oh, he never got to play in the snow. All that work, putting on clothes, taking them off. It says, good night, Froggy. That's a funny one, isn't it? Let's see. What's our Bible story tonight? We're going to learn about David. David in the Bible. It says, David and his song.
David and his song?
Yeah. When he was very little, David liked to throw stones. When he was bigger, he learned to throw them with a sling. You heard of a slingshot?
Yeah.
He was good at throwing. He could hit what he wanted. At night, his mother told him about God. She taught him to say thank you prayers to God for everything he had and for all the things he could do. When David was a bit older, his job was looking after the sheep. He threw stones to scare away wild animals and protect his sheep. David was never scared. He sang thank you songs to God for everything he had and for all the things he could do. See his little harp? That makes music for him to sing his songs with. One day, David went to visit his big brothers. They were soldiers. They were fighting fierce enemies, and one was a giant. He wore shiny battle clothes, and he had a big spear. I am Goliath, roared the giant. If anyone can beat me, then my army will go away. Who dares to try? I dare, said David, for David believed that God was always with him and would always help him win. You're too little, said his brothers. You're too little, said the king. But I can fight lions and bears and wolves, and I know God is with me, said David. Take care, they warned. So David went out. He picked up 5 stones. How dare you fight me like that, said the giant. I dare because God is with me, said David. And he put a stone in his sling, and he threw, and the giant fell. Look, it hit him right in between the eyes and killed him just with one little stone. David grew up to be the next king of his people. He still sang thank you songs to God for everything he had and for all he could do. Dear God, you are my shepherd. You give me all I need, my food, my drink, a place to rest. Yes, you are good indeed. When all the world seems gloomy and scary things are near, you always take good care of me, and so I need not fear. You've given me so many things, and everyone can see the special loving kindness you always show to me. Good night.
Good night.